How to find the perfect vocal chain, as if there was such a thing. Vocal chains are not a one-size-fits-all thing. The last thing you want to be doing is going on a Jaycen Joshua mixing video and looking at exactly all of his settings and exactly all of his plugins and use those exact settings for every single mix. It doesn't work. Every vocal is different, every recording is different, every situation is different, every song is different. I'm going to show you a vocal mixing process that you can use your favorite plugins with to create your vocal chain that works for you. The things I'm showing you have come from years of watching and learning from some of the greatest mixers in the world and how they get their results. It's not as complicated as you think. It's all about trusting your ears. So, you want to build your own vocal chain. The first thing that I recommend putting in a vocal chain is a de-esser. This is my favorite de-esser. I don't really see it anywhere. I can't say that it's particularly popular, but it's my favorite. I like the default settings on it. It's very nicely tuned for vocals, and mainly I like it because it has a dry wet. So when I'm doing de-essing, I actually like to start, this is at 9K, this is 8.8. I've just consistently found that it's a very, very good frequency to target to get a good response from the de-esser. So when I hold this down, it's this frequency button down, it's only gonna show me what's being de-essed, what's being taken out and when.
Or haven't you heard on the tip of my tongue whenever you are around? I'm terrified by the way I'm feeling, but I'm more terrified a new way will take its place. I hope you realize.
So when I played that, you heard that it's only dealing with the S's, the F's, the sounds that we want it to deal with, and it's not triggering for anything else. So that means that this fader in here, which is basically a threshold, is hitting the mark.
I'm terrified by the way I'm feeling, but I'm more terrified a new way will take its place. I hope you realize where you've been leading.
So you can hear it's kind of strong. Like, it's a little bit difficult to detect now because there's not a ton of top end going through there, but I'm just going to bring this down to like maybe 60% and hear what that sounds like.
I'm terrified by the way I'm feeling, but I'm more terrified a new way will take its place. I hope you realize where you've been leading.
So you can hear it's got a little bit more of a natural sound. It is still doing quite a bit, but this is something that I set, do all my other vocal chains, and then maybe you want to revisit it, turn it up, turn it down a little bit. Like, the compressor can like overly compress based on those frequency spectrums. And I just, like, some people do de-essers after, some do them before. I like to do them before because it makes all the subsequent processes sort of less influenced by material that we intend on removing anyway. So that's my reasoning for it. I find that the response of everything down the line is a lot more positive when I do it on the front end. And then if after the whole sort of like vocal chain is over, you feel like it's still got a little too much essing on there, you can throw another one after, or you can just make the one on the front end more intense. Just be conservative, like, not enough de-essing is, I think, a little bit more forgiving than too much de-essing. Give it 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 dB, and then see where you're at the end of your vocal chain. Second step, EQ. Now, I'm partial to equalizers that don't have a lot of visual feedback. Not having too much visual feedback forces you to make your decisions based on what things sound like and not what things look like. And we're mixing sound. We're not mixing frequency spectrums and spectrographs. So my first choice for a vocal EQ is always going to be a Pultec. And how we want to EQ these vocals, we want to focus on the mid-range first and then start worrying about the top end. The magic is in the mid-range, and the more comprehensive and the more effective your mid-range is, not only in your vocals, but in your whole mix, the better that your mix and your vocals are going to translate when you're on a boombox, when you're on a Bluetooth speaker, when you're in the car, when you might not have a lot of that upper and lower fidelity. I'm very familiar with mixing this Chloe's voice, so I kind of already know the areas that I like to target and where, things are good for her voice, but I'll show you my process. What we're going to do is we're going to turn this up to about too much, like 7. And I'm just going to listen to what these bands sound like and make a decision on which one makes the vocal come alive. And mind you, while we're doing this vocal track itself is turned up too loud because I want to hear things in context. I don't really want to be soloing things out. So I'm going to unsolo this vocal here and make my decisions in somewhat context, but it's definitely going to be too loud.
I'm terrified by the way I'm feeling, but I'm more terrified. A new way will take its place. I hope you realize where you've been leading. I could fall in love, so let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind a little.
So it's kind of a cheat code here because I already know 1.52 is always magic on her voice. And the reason is because that's the area that's like the intelligibility of the voice. It's like the consonants, it's the sort of delivery and the clarity of everything. And a pattern that I've noticed, and this isn't applicable to all voices, but it's something that I think can help you at least sort of start getting on the right track with whatever vocal content you're listening to, is that when it comes to women, this 3 to 5K has a harshness to it that I'm sure you notice when I scroll through those. And it's like sometimes when she's singing kind of calmer, it's like, ooh, that's nice. But then when she really starts to project, it gets a little bit stabby, a little bit piercing. But this 1.5 to 2K gives it a lot of presence and a lot of warmth and a lot of clarity without a degree of harshness. But I find when you're mixing male vocals, that principle is reversed, where you have like the 1.5 to 2Ks usually has a strong representation, and you need some of that 3, 4, 5K to just bring a presence and bring a brightness. And that's, you get more clarity out of men in that range with less of that ear piercing sound, unless they're really belting and projecting or they're like a counter tenor or something like that. I'm going to listen to these 1.5 and 2 again and just kind of make a decision on which range I like better. It's okay if we decide that it's not later. No one's going to die. You just need to make decisions and move on to the next decision efficiently, and you're always open to change your mind later.
I'm terrified by the way I'm feeling, but I'm more terrified. A new way will take.
I like what 1.5 is doing to her voice. Now, I'm going to just sit this at 3 dB, not 7. Vocal EQ is all about paintbrushes and not chisels. And I say this shit all the time, and it's because the ear is very sensitive to drastic changes in the way that a voice sounds that makes it sound sort of inhuman. And it's not necessarily like you shouldn't do that or like it's always going to be bad or whatever, but when I'm dealing with a singer like Chloe, where her natural voice is already so good, I don't want to reinvent her voice. I just want to accentuate the characteristics of it that I find impactful. So now let's look at this low end here, see whether we want to bring some 200 or some 300 in. It's going to be very judicious, if at all, because we already have some warmth and some darkness in here.
I'm terrified by the way I'm feeling, but I'm more terrified. A new way will take its place. I hope you realize where you've been leading. I could fall in love, so let that sink.
I think the 200 is nice on her voice, just a little bit of that warmth, for especially because it's got a chill track like this. And then this is a cut, right? So what I like to do with this, and I see a lot of other mixers, like great mixers, do this kind of thing. There's usually some boxiness in between 3 and 700, and that makes sense because like there's a lot of spatial influence in those low mid ranges, and I like to scoop just a little bit out of there. So it's kind of like the Pultec low end trick where you want something, you're trying to boost, let me reverse this, you're trying to boost that 200 and then just sort of like scoop maybe 300 to 500 somewhere, just a touch, just to open up the clarity a little bit and get some of that like density out of there.
I'm terrified by the way I'm feeling, but I'm more terrified. A new way will take its place. I hope you realize where you've been leading.
Now, when I was boosting this and listening to 3, 5, 7, 1K, I was kind of like listening for like where the magic is in the low mids and where the sort of like lack of wealth is. I thought 700 had some good body, not enough to want to like boost it, but it had a good presence, had a good warmth, had a good tubiness to it. So just boosting some 200 and scooping some 300, just kind of focus that low end. And it's like these numbers will change in sort of like exactly where they need to be, but the principle of having that like boost and then a scoop move somewhere in there is a solid principle in more than just vocals. So now that we've got the MIDI cue dealt with, we're going to put another Pultec on here. And some of the Pultec plugins have both of these built into one plugin, but mine, it has them separate, and they are separate units like in actual life, right? And I'm not bringing this in for this low end area. I'm bringing this in for this top end area. My principle with this is I set this to 5, and I usually leave this somewhere around a 5, but I start at 5 and I start at 16K, and I just slowly bring this, this is a shelf EQ, right? So at what point when I bring this down, does that harshness that we experience with the mid-range EQ at that 4 to 5K, at what point does that come out? And when you start to hear that, just click that back up one set, and then that's the money spot.
I'm terrified by the way I'm feeling, but I'm more terrified. A new way will take its place. I hope you realize where you've been leading. I could fall in love, so let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind a little.
I was expecting 8K. 10K I think is a good spot. It's opening the sound up. It's open is the best way I could describe it. And if you're still getting too much of that harshness, you don't like it, you can like turn it up and then boost it more. That piercing quality is called a whistle tone. It's almost like a distortion. It's normal. It happens to every singer, and it's very, very easy to deal with. I'm trying to keep my videos shorter and more to the point because I have a tendency to blab. So I'll explain the whole dealing with whistle tones and harshness on vocals as a separate video where I can address just that, because it deserves some good explanation. One extra little point about vocal EQ before I move on. EQ the vocal so that it makes the best out of the vocal. And if there's any clashes between it and the other elements of the track, solve the clash on the other elements of the track, because vocals are the core of the sound. The drums and the vocals are the two most important things. And I'm not shitting on other instruments or musicians or whatever, but it's what the audience is going to care about most first. So let's talk about compression now. There are 3 compressors that I generally use on vocals, and I generally stick to classic compressors. And the reason is because when you stick to classic compressors, every compressor is very good at doing certain things and not necessarily good at doing other things. So it becomes less of a challenge of like, what are my compressor settings, and more of a challenge of like, which compressor is going to bring the type of compression that's going to serve the song the best to the table. The first one is an 1176 style, and there are all kinds of different emulations of these. I'm a UA guy, I'm a Universal Audio ecosystem user, so you're going to notice all my plugins are UAD. This is even at the slowest setting, it is a very fast and very aggressive compressor. Probably the best rap vocal compressor you can use. Doesn't matter whether it's the blue stripe or the black one or whatever, like they have differences, but caring about minutia like that is just a waste of brain power in my mind. So if you have rap or fast singing or something that really needs a lot of grip and a lot of grasp and a lot of aggression, this is the compressor that you want to use. And how you want to use this is you want to start with the attack on the slowest setting, which is 1, the release on the fastest setting, which is 7, and time that attack until you feel like you're getting the punch and the power. And then usually I'll leave this release on the fastest. You can slow it down a bit if you feel like it helps. It's more of a tone control and less of a dynamic control, as a mastering engineer once stated to me. For ballads, the type of compressor I would recommend is an LA2A. Sure, you're familiar with it. This is what an LA2A looks like. One of the simplest compressions ever, peak reduction and output gain. And then there's like some other shit over here that, you really don't need to care about that much, especially in the context of vocals. But this compressor actually uses a light and a light emitting diode and a photosensitive resistor to carry out its compression. That's why it's called an opto compressor. It's an optical compressor. Its response is like a little slower, a little lazy. This would be a great choice for this song. I actually used the CL1B for this song, but we're going to use an LA2A on it today. I'm going to show you the CL1B just so you know what it looks like, because this is a sort of like 3rd vintage compressor that I recommend using for vocals here. So there are a lot more settings on this one. I will tell you that the most common setting I see In studios, they usually started off either like this or just like this. The reason this is such a popular compressor in recording studios is because it's really, really hard to fuck it up. Like, if you have this on fixed manual, like even if you have no idea what you're doing, you're probably going to get a pretty decent and usable result. So as much as I don't like compressors with more settings, like a greater amount of settings, this one, it's so forgiving in this fixed manual mode. It really is. And you could even just go fixed and just not give a fuck and just, deal the ratio and the threshold and go from there. But I'm going to switch to the LA2A for this, but this is kind of like the settings that were originally on this song when I mixed it for release. And just a quick note on the last of the vintage compressors, the Fairchild 660. I don't like this on vocals hardly ever, but it's such a great guitar and piano and just instrument compressor in general. You probably don't need to do too much configuring it. This is a very transparent compressor. There's a reason they're $60,000 each. They are just buttery and forgiving and musical. So let's dial in an LA2A here.
I'm terrified by the way I'm feeling, but I'm more terrified. A new way will take its place. I hope you realize where you've been leading. I could fall in love, so let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind a little bit. Let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind. How?
You can hear with all of that de-essing and all that EQ work and everything, like you're compressing things based on the frequencies that you think are the most positively influential frequencies in the vocal. And that's why I EQ before compression. This is a technique that Chris Lord-Alge swears by and taught me. I do it for everything, but I do think that to some degree, it's a bit of an advanced technique. So if you're struggling, put a compressor later in the chain, dial it in, and then go back and EQ into it, and that'll help you sort of get a feel for what you can do. But I highly, highly, highly recommend EQ before compression. And when you're dialing in these vocals, it's okay to have that needle be at 0 for some lines and pop up later for other lines. It's kind of an indication that your threshold is sort of sitting right at the point where there's the most activity and it's sort of like the 0 point of the dynamic range of the vocal, in my mind at least. Quick side note before we move on, you really should always have a high pass filter on the voice. At 120, 180 is kind of okay for women as well, but I stick to 120. Don't forget to put that before the compression things. If you have any rumble, any low end things going on, it's going to influence the response of that compressor. Even if you don't think there's anything there, you have nothing to lose by doing it. That's it, man. You don't need to overdo these vocals. Now, if you want to round out this skill set and carry this over into how to make great reverbs to go with it and how to make the vocals really sit in the mix but still pop, check out my other 2 videos. They're longer, but they're incredibly detailed. I explain to you what every single setting on those reverbs do, which ones you need to care about, which ones you don't need to care about, and then the exact process for sort of layering all of these subtle different effects to really help those vocals just be impactful. And more importantly, why it all works. So smash that subscribe button if you want to really understand how to learn how to be a great audio engineer and not just learn how to copy and paste somebody else's settings from somebody else's YouTube video. I'm here to bring you long-term value, not short-term placebo. So let me know what else you want to learn, and I'll do my best to show you how to learn to be great at that thing you're struggling with. So you know how to find your own perfect vocal chain now with whatever you have at your disposal. Go be great.